Everyone, welcome back to Mystical Tutors, episode 1, discussing power levels. I have a couple really cool people joining me today. The great ThisisSurreal and the great TheAlpacaTyrant. I guess you could say this is a real tyrannical experience and it's a little surreal. But hey, my name is Astral Slim and I'm welcome to have you back. And kind of give it in, Surreal and Alpaca, if you'd like to just quickly introduce yourselves.
All right. I am the AlpacaTyrant, formerly known as Tyrant. Someone paid me a stupid amount of money to change my name.
We won't mention who that was.
Not that he didn't just himself. What are we talking about? Like,
We're talking power levels, man. Power levels.
just that's what I'm here for.
Absolutely. Mr. Surreal, how are you today? Would you like to introduce yourself, my fine sir?
I'm doing well. Hi, folks. My name is Surreal. I am a part-time streamer. I am most known for my work in the CEDH, competitive EDH community. I am the not progenitor, but the current, herald. I'm the current herald for the Gruul presence in the format. So I play and created Snoop Thar, which is the most recent iteration for competitive Rurik Thar. I love all things EDH, and I also stream Hearthstone. I'm a big Hunter proponent, and I really like to, when other people want to not interact, I like to punch them in the face, and because they deserve it, getting punched in the face.
Awesome. I'm pleased and happy to have you guys both here for the first episode of Mystical Tutors. And like we said, power levels. That is our topic discussing today. Power levels in Commander, one of the biggest discrepancies, potentially some of the biggest issue you might ever find. Because honestly, what does power level even mean? Like, Surreal, when I say power level in Commander, what does that even mean to you? Walk me through.
But I don't really know. Honestly, I'm glad that this is the first episode of Mystical Tutors because it can only go up from here. But let's say power level is, in general, I'd say you're looking at, it's the rule zero conversation, right? It's what people are saying, hey, I'm looking to have a good, enjoyable experience playing EDH. How powerful is your deck? And generally, you find that people seem to gravitate towards the very easy scale because it's simple to grasp. Of the 1 to 10 scale is easy for people to grasp, but not really convenient because it makes you reduce the very a lot of the complexities of your deck and how you built it, how you play it, your experience and skill as a pilot, your ability to threat assess and read the table. None of that gets really accounted for in the 1 to 10 scale. And generally, at least in my experience, the 1 to 10 scale often puts precons at the level 5. You don't usually find people playing things that are worse or weaker than precons because the precon is the initial starting point for a lot of players getting into Commander. And because that is oftentimes their first foray into Magic. And if it's not your first foray into Magic and you're starting out on Commander, you probably have a collection, which means you can very easily build something that is probably a little more competent and well thought out than some of the seemingly random inclusions that come in the pre-constructed decks. So the 1 to 10 scale doesn't really cover that. And you have half the scale that's not being used, but the upper half of the scale is where everybody plays. And so there's not a lot of nuance to saying 5 through 10. Like, that doesn't make a lot of sense because why would you have a 1 to 10 scale if you're not going to use 1 through 5?
Yeah, so I mean, based on what you're saying, like, the initial product is at the halfway mark. Half a scale is not being used, and half kind of is. And I think that's a really interesting segue to kind of tech in, because 1 to 10, really 5 to 10 matters. Alpaca, what about you? What's the power scale mean to you when it's kind of said?
The one thing I've learned from this absolutely inane power scale is every single deck is a 7 unless it isn't.
Yeah, that's every deck is a 7 or a 6 unless it isn't. And I think Bob makes it really strong. It's like, if you think your deck is good, but it's like mostly average, you call it a 7.
Yeah.
If you think it's below average, you call it a 6. And if it's a precon, you say 5.
Unless it's Prosper, then it's an 8.
Yeah, or no, it's a 9. It's a 9. Okay, but that like brings in the point though, right? There is an inherent issue with the number scale, perception of what it's read. Like, I'll reference the guide that kind of comes out that people tend to reference. I think it's the Channel Fireball one, and I'll be honest, like, I get the number scale. It's not my biggest thing, but I will say for the generalization that they did, I think that chart was good. But still, it's perception. What a 7 is to one person, it's not a 7 to another person. And the text on it leaves it open. Am I right?
I could openly tell you what our group considers a 7. I went and played in a different group where they wanted 7s. They were high 8s to us, is what their 7s were.
Jeez.
Yeah, it shifts a lot, and it often comes from. So for example, actually, there's a really interesting interaction that happened between in a game the other, I don't know, a month or so ago. Alpaca, you and I played a game, and I was playing Marchesa, and I don't remember what you were playing. But the perception of a deck can shift dramatically, and one of the things that the scale does not account for are individual power card inclusions that can entirely shift the state of a game. So if you have a deck and you call it a 7, right? Let's call Marchesa a 7, right? My Marchesa is 7, which all three of us are familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 7. Alpaca comes in with a 7. They're technically evenly matched up until the point where I play Contamination, and then the entire game is shifted.
Yeah.
But if you just come in with and say, "Oh, I have a 7," you're not actually pointing out the fact of a variety of things that you probably need to know, which is when do you expect the game to end? How long are you going to make this game last? Do you have specific cards that can shut down a game or dramatically change the game state in ways that, putting together, it's like, I have some board wipes, I have some solid mid-range creatures, I have good targeted removal spells. If you're a deck that's deciding to play something like, a favorite of mine, Chains of Mephistopheles, that can dramatically shift the game, or even just, like I mentioned, Contamination. If you're playing Contamination, your deck, the rest of the deck might be a 7, but Contamination can dramatically shift the way that the game is going to play out to where that often feels like something you probably need to mention when you're having that Rule 0 conversation. And if everybody just comes in and shortcuts to, I'm playing 7s, cool, we're all playing 7s, you're missing it. Because 7s in one instance means I have good cards but am not going infinite, and the other one might mean I have slightly below average cards but I can go infinite.
Right.
Both of those are accurate descriptions, but they're not going to really feel the same.
No, they won't. It's like you said, the inclusion of one card, and I think that kind of ties into like what our Discord and like the Draw for Turn community kind of proposes. I know every time, like even when the three of us are in a game, like the big things we talk about, the deck, what does it do? Are there like key cards you've got? How fast are you playing to win? And like, what's your fast mana tutor package? Like, right? Like, that's the thing we always talk about, because power level goes out the window. We want to know like what the key thing is going to happen. I mean, let's take a look at like Alpaca's Luris deck. I think that's a really cool concept of a deck. It's very interesting to get off the ground. But the way he has to go in to describe it really kind of makes you understand actually what you're going up against, right? Like, if you were to describe it, what's like quick 3 sentences you would use to describe Luris, to give an example?
It's basically just low cost, keep everything. It's like, it's hard to describe because obviously everything's low cost, so Luris can take advantage of it. A ton of recursion. It's a mill deck, surprisingly, somehow.
Yeah.
But I have Nettlecysts. I have stuff like Nettlecyst and all that glitters just to make Luris a powerhouse. I have recurable unblockable. It just does so much. Like it can come out of the gate very fast and then just sputter, because that's the nature of the game sometimes.
I think what's really interesting here is that at no point did Alpaca use a number.
Yeah, but
there's no numbers here.
No, within that description, we've got it's quick, low to the ground, what it does, and the strategy. Right then and there, I've got an idea of what I'm going up against. Like, if I'm going to describe my Corval deck, I am going to say, Big Dragon going to come out turn 3, turn 4. I'm going to make a bunch of treasures, and I might Food Chain combo. Right then and there, you know turn 4 is my swing turn, what my endgame strategy is, and some of the key cards to look out for. And like Surreal, when you're talking about Marchesa, right? Like, what would be like your 3-sentence description for Marchesa?
Oh, I think I can do it in one.
Do it.
Play no bad cards in Mardu.
It gives a good summation. I mean, we kind of know contamination.
Play no
right?
bad cards in play no bad cards in Mardu with the possible chance of breach combo. That's it. There it was. That was the Marchesa deck. I covered it.
And that sums it up. And like, I think based on the conversation, like right away, we know what's in our deck set. Like, I might know your 2 decks kind of take off the ground, but like, it might be good stuff, all good stuff, and low to the ground and quick. But to me, that's going to tell me that Corvold, my deck's probably going to be a bit too much because I can just pop it off and it's just done. There's not much interaction that's going to happen. That doesn't lead to a good game, I would say, right?
Yeah.
A good game is interaction and good memories, at least in my opinion.
Going into Lyris, one of the things that you should be expecting, just because, like, it's not a direct win condition, but because it's such a good card, it only costs 2 mana. Easily recurable with Lyris is the Voidwalker.
Oh god, that's right, yeah.
It's so stupid, especially because I use Alter the Brood.
Ooh. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that isn't encapsulated when you're using the 1 to 10 scale, so things that you want to think about, because power level discussions is really just another way of saying, let's talk rule 0.
Yeah.
So you're not really talking about power level. You're talking about power level as a form of what do you want out of this game and what kind of play experience are you looking for? Right? That's really what power level is trying to address. It simply wants to shortcut it and boil it down into something that's really simple. But the problem is it's not. It's not simple. It's very nuanced. And honestly, you really can't break it down into numbers because it's a conversation that needs to be had. It's not a show up, say number, go from there. Because that's one of the ways that you can actually lose out on the very important Rule 0 discussion where both, like Alpaca said, both players say 7s, but one player's perception of what that number means is very drastically different from the others. This is incredibly important. I mean, right now we're in pandemic times. So arguably it's almost even more important in a sense because you don't have LGSs anymore. You can't walk into a game shop and play. You can't really... Now that people are playing over webcam, you are all the more likely to run into people that you've never met before and you might never meet before. It's all the more important to make sure that you don't botch your first impressions or your second or third impressions because even then, right now we're all on camera. Normally when people are playing online, you don't even have a face to look at. So it's not like you can really read facial if somebody, you can't read someone's smiling expression. You can't see them shrinking into themselves if they're having a bad time. You can't see that play experience playing out on their face and their body language. Having Rule 0 is all the more important in that instance. And if you limit yourself to saying, I'm playing whatever number you want to list at, you're kind of missing out. And you're probably endangering the possibility, you're allowing for the opportunity to screw up what is probably the next 2 hours of your day. And if somebody just gets to play Commander once a week on Friday nights for F&M, do you really want to waste 2 hours of their time sitting around and having them be miserable? No, because it sucks, and you would hate it if it happened to you.
Yeah.
So be a good citizen and be a good community member. Make sure that other people are able to have that discussion the same way that you wouldn't want someone to show up and say, we're playing 8s. And if you bring out 8s, it feels bad even if if everybody else is way lower than you and you stomp the table, well, nobody else feels great. And honestly, you probably don't feel that great either.
No, but I'd absolutely agree with that. I mean, the whole point of this power level discussion really at the end boils down to what are you looking for in a game? So instead of pitching out a number, I'm a 7, I mean, be candid in the type of game you want. I mean, I'll be straightforward and say, I'm looking for a grindy game. I'm looking for a fun game. I'm looking to play Ashling the Pilgrim in 99 Mountains, which, is technically a deck.
I built that deck back in high school.
Yeah.
So here's a question, actually. Sean, when you walk into a game of Commander, you sit down to play. What are the 3 things, the 3 to 5 things that you want to know about your opponents and their I guess their game plan. What do you want to know about the expectations of your opponent? What do you want to know about their deck?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's pretty straightforward. Like, are you rocking a tutor package? What's your combo or how do you win the game and when do you expect to do it? And are you playing any sort of disruption stuff? Are you going to be messing with the board state? Like, are you board clear, land destruction, or counterspell? I want to get an understanding of I don't need to know every in and out of the deck. What I just need to know is, like, what am I walking into? I need to get a feel for that. And I mean, Alpaca, like, what would you say are, like, your 3 or 5 things?
My what, sorry?
Like your 3 or 5 things of what you would ask someone about their deck when you sit down to play with them, to learn about it.
It's mostly just overall how like the game's going to look, how it might unfold. Because if I'm playing with something like Blackjack, and you're playing with a deck that just does nothing but rip apart graveyards, I'm going to have a very bad day. Like, that's not going to be enjoyable. I understand there's a lot of graveyard hate, but if there's consistent, it gets very annoying for a deck like mine.
Yeah. And I think for myself, I would say I try and, because I appreciate the simplicity and the directness that the 1 to 10 scale aims to achieve. However, I don't think it does that. And I think I would rather give you a checklist and say, here, rattle off a couple of different aspects that I'm going to ask you about your deck. So number 1, are you playing tutors? If so, how many, roughly? Number 2, are you playing fast mana? That means your mana crypts, your mana vaults. Are you generally on the lower side of the ramp package, right? So that's the first 2 questions. The next question I ask is, how soon do you expect to win the game? I spent an entire year tracking all of my decks on their statistics and how games went to have a better understanding of when my games end or functionally end, right? Because those are 2 different things.
Completely, absolutely.
So asking someone when they expect to end the game or win, I think is a pretty strong, a pretty easy question to ask, because when they expect to win versus when they can win is very different. And then I guess for me, it doesn't matter, but for other folks, they generally want to know, are you playing any kind of serious or heavy duty stacks elements, mass land destruction, or whatever. Like, ask about your pet peeves. If there's something that you don't want to play against with your deck, or you're just not in the mood to deal with, tell someone. Because the last thing you want to do is get an hour and a half into the game and be like, shit, I want nothing to do with insert random card here. Like, if your opponent has a random, I don't know, Alpaca, what's a card that you hate to play against?
It's on the tip of it. It's sitting right there.
What does it do?
I don't like. When my brain doesn't work, it just straight up doesn't work.
Good.
He hates it so much, he's burned it away from his memory.
I mean, I know one card that Alpaca hates, Contamination. When he's not playing black.
In fairness, that wouldn't have gone bad if the other Izzet player hadn't have overloaded a Vandal Blast.
Yeah, that's true. That definitely happened. Yeah, but like one thing is, Matt hates discard. Hates consistent discard. So things you don't want to play, like that's a thing you would bring up. If you're playing a deck that specifically works around the graveyard and you want to actually play the game, maybe you should say like, hey, I want to be able to play with my graveyard this game. Are you giving away information? I guess. But as long as people don't sit there and go, oh, that means we have to target him with the graveyard hate. Like, no, that's not how that works. You want to allow people to play the game. Unless you are actively trying to do nothing more but make someone have a miserable time so that they never play with you again.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's all under the discussion.
So your pet peeves, are you playing fast mana? How many tutors are you running? When do you plan to win the game? And I guess, honestly, this is the most open-ended question. Is your deck fun to play against?
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I've talked to someone in our community about one of their decks where I will never play against it. Because every turn, all I did was watch him solitaire, but it was almost never for a game-winning play.
Yeah, that's another pet peeve. How often do you expect your storm decks or anything in that realm of how long are you going to sit there twiddling your thumbs? And will twiddling your thumbs end the game?
Yeah,
well,
sometimes it breaks, and then it's
like-
just like, well, that was wasted time.
I will admit sometimes Lurith takes a bit longer to play a turn, but that's because if I don't have the infinite combo, I'm stuck in grind mode. I'm still affecting everyone else's board for my entire turn. It's not like I'm just sitting here doing my own thing. I am slowly winning the game.
Right. You're doing you're progressing things forward. I mean, I would say the
slow.
same with it's slow, but it does something. Like
But it
Corvold
gets
is
there.
Corvold is the same for me. We played a game the other day. I had a very long turn, but I dealt 10 damage to everyone. I took out a player. No offense, Surreal.
It was turn 4. I died. I accept it. It happens.
And then I dirtled around trying to find the rest of my way, but I impacted the board, and I did end up on killing myself at the end. But I had left the board state in such a way it was impactful. It was a long turn, but it was there. But
I think Triniform was worth dying on turn 4 of that game.
No, turn 4. You died in turn 4 before the Triniform game. But anyways.
I know, and then I returned the favor.
Okay, that's fair.
I returned the
Grudges
favor.
can carry over into a game. Always remember that. Not the point of the discussion today. But
Another day.
another day. We'll get into the grudges another time. But that brings in kind of the idea, right? So this whole time we've talked about power levels. Everything we've discussed about our decks, we've been open about it and what we've just said and what they do and how they do things. Never once did we assign a number. And I think this bears in, communication is actually the underlying key. And like what Surreal and Alpaca said, the discussion of a power level isn't what your deck's supposed to do. Ultimately, make it what you want to get out of a game. Just talk about your 3 to 5 key things, what your deck kind of does or what you're looking to get out of the game, and just be open about it. If someone's going to be super secretive about a deck, honestly, I'm not going to sit down at a table with them. I don't want to play against a mysterious opponent. It's not a tournament. I'm looking for fun. I want to have a good communication and memorable game. So
Honestly, you can Alpaca.
Sorry, I've been digging through blackjack. I'm not pulling out all 21, but just in terms of power level, this is why it's so hard to gauge sometimes. Because my commander's random,
Yeah,
I'm gonna go low end with one of these.
Sure.
I could end up in the middle with one of these. Yes, surprisingly, Machias is only mid range for my deck.
That actually makes perfect sense.
But if my deck spits out one of these, I'm gonna go crazy.
Is Crick in the list of blackjack commanders?
Crick is not.
Crick probably does bad things in that deck.
it might be
Probably.
disgusting.
Yeah, Crick would be probably pretty good.
I've contemplated picking one up, but I do have a
It's
Russian
fine.
Yawgmoth in there.
It's $5 now. It's really cheap. It dropped dramatically, but I think that Alpaca brings up an interesting point. Commander is a game where so much freedom of expression is allowed, and I won't say it's common, but there's definitely I've played against enough decks where people will have either modal commanders where they can swap out what commander's at the helm of the deck. They will have decks that have a set of 120 creatures. They'll shuffle up and pick 30 or 40 of them, and that's what they play the game with, which can dramatically change your power level. Realistically, the entirety of this conversation can be boiled down into one sentence, if you ask me. Power level is irrelevant, but now I've made it 2 sentences. But basically, the discussion of power level and using a 1 to 10 scale is really just a stand-in for what do you want to play, how long do you want to be here, how much fun do you want to have, what kind of fun do you want to have, what does that look like? It's really just a question of asking about play experience. Power level is another synonym for play experience, because asking what your power level is really asking, am I going to have fun in this game? Are you going to have fun in this game? And if the answer is no for any of the parties involved, you should probably reassess how things are going. Because otherwise, I mean, unless you derive enjoyment from making other people's days miserable, slightly me.
I think that's called a mono blue player.
Yeah, in some capacity. But unless that's what your goal is, then there's no reason for you to ever step into a game with the hope that you won't have fun. Commander's here because we want it to be. It's still the community format. Make it about community. Ask the people you're going to sit down with so that nobody feels like they walk away from that table wasting an hour or two of their time. Be respectful of people's time. We're all really busy, and nobody wants to sit around and waste time and not having fun.
Yeah.
Talk. That's it. Talk. And friends, I think that was solid. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining me. We'll get in touch on hopefully the next Mystical Tutors. Friends, remember to hit that bell notification to stay up to date on the latest videos, and hit that follow button and subscribe for more videos coming up.
It only goes up from here, folks.